So on to my last 2 years at senior school. Senior school, it really does it does sort of what it's supposed to set you up for life and teach you the skills. And of course, you're coming up to your working. So here we are, 2 years before I'd start my working life. Of course, people go on to college, and in my day, you could leave school at 15, which I did. But nowadays, of course, they go on and do gap years. I've never heard of a gap year in my time. And they go on to universities, things like that. Well, that wasn't going to be my fate. So here we go. So, as I say, I had this sort of reputation from the junior school. But to the surprise of my headmaster, I started wearing a Rugby Elim Church Sunday School badge, and I can remember, great surprise that this sort of rebel chap actually went to a Sunday school, and so there we go. And I got on very well with my music and religious instruction teacher, and I began to sort of share my testimony, because we had RE in days, and they talked about, the churches in Rugby. There was a map up, I remember, and they talked about the Ten Commandments. And the question was, what is a Christian? And his reply was, well, somebody who does good and everything else. But I knew then, and I told him, I says, there's a special thing you have to do. You have to give your life to the Lord Jesus and have a saved experience. So I remember doing that. And then in around 1964-65 in Rugby, there was, and there always has been, there still is, the churches, particularly the evangelical churches, working together. And they used to have joint meetings and things like that. We had a building, and it's still there, it's derelict now in Rugby, but it was known as the Brotherhood House. And you could use it all for all sorts of things. And you could have dances in it. They'd let practically anybody use it, but it originally was the original Rugby Baptist church. So it was a church type building. And anyway, it was decided that they would run every Sunday night what they called a coffee bar. And they'd have this coffee bar, and they'd have a group there. It was a local group from a Rugby church, and they'd sing these gospel songs, and they just let people come. They could just come and turn up, go in then, and we'd provide coffee for them and biscuits, and also they could smoke. So they'd come in and they'd smoke and everything else, and the music was going, and then they'd have a short message, say about 10 minutes. They'd speak the gospel to them, and we were there to witness to them, and we'd sat and talked to them and get to know them. And this sort of helped me really, because then at school, I started witnessing to teachers, headmasters, not so much the headmaster, but the caretaker, who I found actually his family and my mum knew each other from years ago, which sort of made a bit of a connection there. And at school, I became very helpful, and I could do all the practical jobs. We had school milk in those days before Mrs. Thatcher stopped it in the 70s. And school dinners, I'd put the chairs away afterwards and do a bit of sweeping up and cleaning. I thought it was great. I enjoyed doing these practical jobs, taking the bins down to the thing. And so that sort of was what I was doing. But I do remember witnessing to a lot of people, even some of the teachers. One teacher, particularly our geography teacher, asking me, why does the age-old question had been asked many, many times, why does God allow this and that to happen? And in fact, my dad wrote an answer to it, because I went and asked him, and we learnt about what God gives us is a free will, and because of that free will, that's why we have things and that sort of thing. So I did give a testimony, and I was strong in my faith, and I believed in it very, very strongly, and wasn't ashamed of the gospel. And I'm so glad about that. Even though the renegade side of me, I think it started to disappear anyway as these things went on. And then in April 1966, I remember very well at our church, to be honest, things weren't quite so good, one can remember. And then we had a new minister, and it's always refreshing to get somebody new. And so we had a new pastor who came to, and his name was Arthur Thomas, or Pastor Thomas as we would have called him, and his wife Brenda, and a little lad called Lorne, and later on a daughter called Rachel. And he was, to me, a breath of fresh air, and he was so kind to me. And he really took an interest in me, and we'd go out, if he'd go into another church, he'd take me with him and things like that. And I was so blessed to have known him, and he became a lifelong friend. Both him and his wife Brenda have now gone to be with the Lord, but I'm still in touch with his daughter Rachel. And I was able to visit him many times, and he came to my house. I even took him to Northern Ireland, and he wanted to go and see Pastor McConnell at Whitewell. And so it was really somebody at a crucial time in my life showed me such love from our Lord Jesus and from God. And it had a big impression on me. And when all sorts of influences around, this pastor in my youth, I really loved, and I'm so thankful, I'm so grateful for him. So that was that. And then in Easter 1967, we moved from our house in Mellish Road, and we moved down to Bilton Road. We were on top of the hill, and to be honest, my dad wasn't the greatest of health. And gosh, going up that Mellish Hill at times with his breathing. So we had applied to get a house sort of on the flat, and we got one in Bilton Road. And it was just 100 metres from what wasn't at that time to police houses. Now, there's a story behind that we shall find out in the next video. Being so close to them, still hadn't quite got rid of some of my things I did. So anyway, here's my last school report. So this was July 1967, and so this was to set me on my work life. So it says this. So the subject was English, and the mark assessment was D. I don't know if it was anything lower than a D, but oh yes, there was an E, so maybe that was the lowest, I don't know. But anyway, the teacher says below average. His handwriting is atrocious and spelling infantile. However, he has attempted to remedy these sad omissions, so that wasn't too bad. Then mathematics, I got an E. And the teacher says, has rarely shown any interest or will learn. Work awful. So that was a good start. Boy, I wasn't good at maths. he had a calculator, which in later life, was a lifesaver to me. And it sat up. He says, and I remember him saying that calculator is going to stay there. I mean, it was an old big mechanical thing, it wasn't like we have nowadays. And he says, because we'll never use them, and I'll never use them in teaching. So that was that. And so we come to history. Now I love history. Everybody knows me. I love history and everything else. But I got an E. It must have been the lowest E. Unable to read his works. So that was my history. Geography. I love geography. I've travelled and all sorts. But anyway, I got a D. Has shown little interest. So there we go. And then we come to art. Satisfactory. And I got a D for that. I mean, I could hardly draw water, let alone draw pictures. It wasn't one of my better subjects. And talking of art, I remember we had art and craft. There was two together, and one day we were all doing. Some of us were doing clay, and fiddling around with clay. Then to put it in the furnace and see what it came out. Anyway, somebody threw some clay across the room. Teacher saw it and said, "Who do that?" Well, of course, nobody volunteered. So everybody, including me, who were doing trade, we were lined up, and we had 3 wallops of the slipper on the backside. And he must have been angry that day. Found out later the one that threw it wasn't doing clay at all, but never mind. Oh, 3 wallops on the backside. Didn't do me any harm, I suppose, really. Still alive to tell the tale. So that's what I can remember about art and craft. And then metalwork, a poor standard of work, and I got E for that. Woodwork, D. So he is a willing worker. Now, Mr. Bent Marshall, he knew I was a Christian, always encouraged me as a Christian. So, I mean, it was no good at woodwork either. I remember doing something on the lathe and you put the chisel on the lathe and I kept it on and the bit fell off. I just saw through it. Got no idea at all. Physical activities, again, because I used to wear glasses, wasn't brilliant on the field of playing rugger, as we used to call it, rugby. Satisfactory, so as best he could do. He didn't even give me a score on that. Technical drawing, here we go. Got an E, has obstinately rejected this subject, works little and cares less. So there you go. I wasn't very good. Now that was to become, I worked in engineering for 40 years, so drawings was my lifeblood, but you would never have thought so from that. Physics. These are the two science subjects, physics and biology. Physics E, doesn't take enough care. And then biology, he gave me D, and he said, as above, so doesn't take care. Now, I met him years ago, Mr. Sharp. I met him years because my daughter went to the same school. And when I saw him, I said to him, do you remember me? And he said, yes. He says, I said, well, you ought to. You give me the cane. Always says, you can't even push them out the door on a fire drill now. So they were different times, weren't they? So here's my form master's report from my last school. Rather obstinate in his attitude to work. He needs to alter his attitude and realise that providence works better with a little assistance from the individual. I mean, I did tell them about my faith in God, everything else, and they seem to think that I should put a bit more effort. They weren't wrong too either. I'm sure of that. But so that was that. Then my headmaster's comments were, despite the above very adverse but very true comments, I feel that Stephen will do well in a job to do with people. He has been very helpful at the school. So that was a nice end to it. Of course he was right. I just got on well with people, and that was to become one of my better skills in life. I think due to the lack of everything else, I concentrated on getting on well with people. And so ended my 4 years of senior school, ready for 52 years of work. And I don't think I was really ready, but I did it anyway. And so I left school, and that was that.